Why is it that we have access to more information than ever before? We can pick up our phones, we can use ChatGPT and ask it questions, we can do research in ways that we weren't able to 100 years ago, yet we still struggle so much to make decisions and take action. Why is it that more information often leads to less clarity and less certainty and causes us to delay action even further? And why do we get stuck in the loop of constant information gathering without making true progress towards our goals and on our projects? The answer to these questions lies in what I call the information trap. And in this video, we're going to break it down in detail. We're going to learn more about what the information trap is, why we end up getting stuck in it, the consequences of this trap you may not have considered or at least not externalized. And finally, we're going to talk about how to combat this information trap and escape it, not just once, but time and time again, transforming yourself into the person who takes action instead of just excessively gathering information. So what is the information trap? Put simply, the information trap is a cycle where we excessively research and gather information at the expense of real action in the world. I can almost guarantee you have experienced this trap before. You may even be in it right now. You have goals, you have projects, you have ideas that you want to work on and make progress on, but instead of actually doing the thing that pushes them forward, you instead engage in research, theorizing, information gathering, whether that's reading books or watching YouTube videos or talking to people about your idea instead of actually working on it. And to understand this, we can conceptually imagine that there are two worlds. There's the world of theory and information, and there's the world of action and experience. Now, we don't just exist in one world at a time. We're always taking action on some things and we're always theorizing about things. So you're crossing between the two. But regardless, there's a distinction between these two worlds. In the world of theory, you are not taking action. You're thinking, you're researching around the thing. In the world of action, you're doing the thing. You're making mistakes. There's trial and error. You're getting feedback from the world. This is what leads to experiential knowledge, which is not just theory. The truth is that you want to balance your time between these two worlds, because if you spend too much time in the world of action and you never theorize and you never think, then you're unlikely to make good decisions and be strategic about things. You just get caught up in constant, indiscriminate action. But if you spend all your time in the world of theory, then you don't do anything. You don't make progress on anything. You're merely a thinker and not an action taker. Now, there's a certain point where we should cross over from the world of theory and thinking and research and information into the world of action. And this point is called the margin. This is where we have enough information to act, and any further information will not help us. It will not help us become more confident or certain in the path ahead. If it does, then it's likely because of overconfidence and confirmation bias, which we'll look at later in this video, because those are also traps. When you're far below the margin, then one of the best things you can do is gather information, to do a bit more research, to understand the landscape in which you're operating or understand the goal you're working towards. But as you approach this margin, the information you gather becomes less and less useful. And as you pass this margin, the value of action far outweighs the value and usefulness of acquiring more information. So how do you know where you sit along this margin line? The first thing I would say is that it's usually a feeling. You kind of know internally when you should be taking action, but you're not. You kind of know when you're just gathering more information and data points instead of doing the uncomfortable thing that actually requires work and exposes you to the potential for failure, no matter how small. But there are a few key characteristics of the information trap. We've gone past this margin, where you're past the point where information is useful to you and is in fact detrimental. The first is that you keep reviewing the same information over and over again, and you're not really gaining anything useful from it. You might be reading article after article on the same topic, or books that are really just rehashes of other books that you've already read, or podcasts where they talk about that book, and you kind of know this stuff, but your hope is that something will stick out to you and make you take action, that you'll have an epiphany. But this never happens. The second is that you feel a growing sense of anxiety because you're not taking real action in the world. You have this ambition, you have this energy. That's why you came up with the project or the goal or the idea in the first place. You want to work on something. But as you get stuck in the information trap, this energy is not getting converted into real action. It's just getting converted into information gathering, which doesn't really satisfy it, right? And so it just kind of turns itself into a feeling of stress or anxiety. The third is that you keep telling yourself just a little more research. Every time you're faced with the opportunity to enter the arena and act, you instantly revert to, but I don't have enough information. I need to do a little bit more research, or I'm not quite certain about this yet. It's like a defense mechanism that stops you from taking action. It's your default. And if that's what's happening, then you are well stuck in the information trap. Fourth, you're moving further and further away from the problem or goal that you started with. For example, you might decide that you want to become a freelancer. Maybe you're a designer, you work a job and you want to go out on your own. And so you start researching about how to do that. And you gain a bunch of information, but at some point you end up looking at comparison tables between different project management softwares and so on and so on and so forth. And it's like you've just gone so far away from the original problem or goal, which is to become a freelancer, and you're focused on like gathering information about something over here, which is just so far removed, even if it is related. It's not relevant right now. And finally, you are overemphasizing data over experience. You're relying solely on secondhand information over experiential learning. You're reading 10 books on how to become a freelancer instead of trying to find clients. You're gathering information about the best workout and nutrition plans instead of going to the gym and eating less. You're not putting in the work, putting in the reps to get that experiential learning, that wisdom, that tacit knowledge that can only be gained by doing things. So that is what it feels like to be stuck. You keep reviewing the same information again and again. You feel the sense of anxiety. You keep telling yourself to do just a little more research. You're moving further and further away from where you started, and you're overemphasizing secondhand information and data over experience. But why do we get stuck in the information trap? Understanding this will help us become aware of what's happening to us when we fall into this trap and be able to stop ourselves from falling into it. So one of the core reasons we get stuck in this trap is due to psychological comfort and the illusion of productivity. Information gathering is safe, it's comfortable, it's cozy. It doesn't entail any risk. It doesn't entail any potential for failure or criticism or mistakes, right? You can just sit in the comfort of your own home or home office, and you can read and you can watch things and you can use ChatGPT and you can talk to people about your crazy ideas, and you can do all of this without ever really exposing yourself to downside. But the big problem with this is that it feels productive, right? You kind of know it's not when you get to the end of the day and you look back at your day and think, I haven't really done anything. I've just gathered information that I didn't really need. But when you're in the process of it, it feels good, right? Like you feel like you're getting somewhere, even though you're not. This is the illusion of productivity. You're not actually producing anything. You're not really getting any closer because you're past that margin point, right? You should be in the world of action, but it feels good. And so you keep going and you get stuck in this cycle, and you constantly postpone the moment where your choices have real consequences, which can be uncomfortable. It is always going to be easier to read a book about how to start a business than to actually start one, or study workout plans and nutrition plans and actually do the actions that help you become stronger and build muscle and look good. I think part of the reason why it's addicting is that there's a dopaminergic component to this where new information is novel. It's like a reward. And so we do feel like we're making progress on some level. And when you can get rewards from something like that, from information gathering without so much of the downside or fear of failure or risk, then it's very easy to keep doing it. It's like video games. It's why people can play video games for 12 hours a day, because they're engineered to be addictive and they give you all the rewards without any of the real world downsides. As you become the person who knows how to escape the information trap and enter the world of action, you start to value the rewards of action more. You train yourself to seek out those rewards knowing that they are ultimately more fulfilling and better for you. Another reason we get stuck, and I would say we probably get stuck in this trap more now than we ever have in human history, is because we live in an informationized world. Information overload, right? This is something I talked about in the rise of dopamine culture. And there's this implicit belief that the more information, the better. And so we naturally seek out more and more information, even past the point where it's useful. And at some point, information was extremely valuable. You wanted to know which berries would kill you, or what the weather was going to look like in a week. These were things that would help you survive. At some point in history, the more information, the better was actually true. Now it's not really the case because we've actually got too much information, but our brains can't really figure that out. As Michael Easter says, in the human brain, less equals bad, worse, unproductive. More equals good, better, productive. Our scarcity brain defaults to more and rarely considers less. And when we do consider less, we often think it sucks. In the next section of this video, we're going to look at one of the consequences of excess information and why it actually makes you less effective, not just because you procrastinate, but it actually makes you worse at decision making and choosing the right actions. Another reason we get stuck in this trap is that the more information we gather unnecessarily, the more likely we are to fall into analysis paralysis. And so there's this fallacy where you think that as you gain information, as you acquire more data, that your clarity on what it is that you should do will increase. But actually, this is not the case. Often it decreases as you gain more information because you're exposed to all these ideas that you don't really need. Another reason we get stuck is that the information we have and we keep seeking is very low utility. We loop around in circles trying to find data and information that can only be gained through doing and tinkering. For example, perhaps you want to get better at sales. Well, the best way to get better at sales is by actually doing it. Yes, you can read some books, you can watch some videos, you can take a course, but the most useful knowledge, the most useful information is the tacit kind that only comes through doing. And finally, perhaps the main reason we get stuck in the information trap is that we have a strong desire for certainty. This is the cousin of perfectionism, where we have a pursuit of the perfect decision or course of action, and it leads us to excessive information gathering because we want to be sure about it before we do something. We want to be certain, and we think that the way to gain that certainty is by just gathering more information. Whereas the truth is that certainty and confidence often follows initial action. But we hate uncertainty. As this quote from a Psychology Today article says, "The human mind hates uncertainty. Uncertainty implies volatility, randomness, and danger. When we notice information is missing, our brain raises a metaphorical red flag and says, pay attention. This could be important." So we've looked at why we get stuck. Psychological comfort, the illusion of productivity. It feels like we're making progress. We live in an informationized world. We think that the more information, the better. This leads us to analysis paralysis. It's the curse of knowledge. More information doesn't lead us closer to action. The information we keep seeking is low utility. There's a better form of information which comes through doing and taking action on things. And fundamentally, we have a desire for certainty that keeps us looping around in this trap. Before we look at how to combat this trap and escape it, I want to really drill down on the consequences, because at least for me, really internalizing how destructive this trap can be, how much it can hold you back, is what really pushes me to try and fix it and not fall into it. And while the list of consequences could be endless, I want to focus on 4. The first exposes the folly of excess information gathering, and that is that more information doesn't always lead to better decisions and actions, but often worse decisions and actions. It actually impairs your decision making, which is quite counterintuitive because, again, we think the more the better, but this is not always true. And it's because of the confidence accuracy discrepancy. This is where a disconnect grows between our confidence levels due to information gathering and the real world factors. And there's a great study done by a guy called Paul Slovic in 1974. He gathered together 8 professional horse handicappers, so professional gamblers basically, people who made their living from gambling on horses. And he created this test where they would predict 40 horse races in 4 consecutive rounds. So 4 rounds, 10 races each. In the first round, he gave each gambler 5 pieces of information that the gambler wanted on each horse. So it might be years of experience the jockey had. It might be the fastest speed that any given horse had achieved in the past year, whatever. And he asked them to predict the winner of each race and also state their confidence level, right? How confident were they in their bet? Now, if there's an average of 10 horses in each race, then there's a blind chance, like random guessing, that each handicapper would be right 10% of the time, and that their confidence with a blind guess would be 10%. In the first round, with 5 pieces of information, the handicappers were 17% accurate, so a 70% increase over the 10% baseline. Their stated confidence level was an average of 19%, so pretty close, right? There isn't much discrepancy between the accuracy of their bet and their confidence in it. Here's where it gets interesting though. In round 2, they were given 10 pieces of information. And then round 3, they were given 20 pieces of information. And in the 4th and final round, 40 pieces of information. What's interesting about this is that their accuracy didn't go up at all. It flatlined at 17%. But their confidence in their bet went up to 34%. It almost doubled. And this is the confidence accuracy discrepancy. It's the fact that more information can lead us to feeling more confident about something while the accuracy of it doesn't change. Excess information can inflate our confidence without improving our decision quality. The person who reads 20 business books before starting their own business might feel an inflated sense of confidence that they know how to build a business, but they've merely gathered information. Their decision making isn't likely to be that much better. In fact, it might be worse because they lack the experiential context to frame the information that they've gathered, the theoretical information that they've gathered. This is a form of overconfidence bias where you overestimate your competence, which leads to worse decision making. It's also likely due to confirmation bias, where as you seek more and more information past the margin, past the point where you should have entered into the world of action, you'll likely just double down on the information that suits your preconceived bias and not challenge your thinking with new data and information. The second big consequence of the information trap is missed opportunities. This is perhaps the most obvious one. The longer we spend past the margin, the more we incur the opportunity cost of not taking action. The more time we spend in the information trap, the longer we delay the acquisition of real data, real experience, and real skill. I can look back at my life and see clearly that every time I've been stuck in this trap, I would have been better off just taking action before I felt ready and learning by doing. And it kind of pains me to think about how many years I've spent in this state of information gathering. It is a huge waste of time, but it led me to make this video. So maybe it's not all lost. You miss out on a lot of personal growth, right? Because you stay in this safe, comfortable zone of information gathering. It feels good. We talked about it before, but that doesn't grow you. When you're in the trap, you are by definition acting in an extremely risk-averse manner. And it's one that will lead to atrophy and stasis if it hasn't already. One consequence I alluded to before is increased stress and anxiety. It's something you feel when you're in the information trap. Excessive information gathering is related to overthinking and analysis paralysis. They sort of all exist in the same category. It's a form of chronic indecision and inaction. This leads to a constant low-level feeling of anxiety because on some level you know you should be taking action. You know you should be doing things. You know you have enough information in order to act. Your ambition wants to be channeled. It wants to be exercised. But instead of letting it run in a specific direction, you're leashing it. And its energy gets converted into stress and anxiety and discomfort, which cannot be satisfied by mere information gathering. And if you don't figure out how to escape this trap, it can lead to an erosion of confidence and self-efficacy. When you repeat this cycle of inaction, when you repeat the information gathering without ever using the information and doing things, it starts to diminish your belief in yourself, in your ability to affect change, in your perception of your agency. And it can lead to this vicious cycle where low self-confidence, as a result of inaction, leads to even further hesitation. And in this sense, it can be a very dangerous sort of downwards spiral that's harder to get out of, which means that You should really figure out how to get out of this trap sooner rather than later. Because if you let it run on and you let it build momentum and inertia, it is a lot harder to get out of. So with all that said, let's look at how to combat this trap and how to escape it. The first thing we must do is intercept and externalize. So often what happens when you're in the information trap is you'll sit there for a few hours, you'll do your research, you'll gather information, and it's not until you look back after the fact that you realize you've wasted so much time. You've procrastinated. You've delayed the actions that you need to take. But at this point, it's the end of the day and you're onto something else. You just don't feel great about it. But then you repeat the process the next day and the next day and so on and so forth. What you want to do is train yourself to intercept it when you're doing it. And you can do this. It requires an awareness, one that you've already started developing by watching this video and understanding what this trap is. But you want to build your pattern recognition. You want to know, what are the signs that I'm falling into this trap? Is it fear of taking action, of potential failure? Is it the desire for comfort? Is it that there's a thing I'm putting off, a decision I need to make that I keep putting off, and it's pushing me into just like the world of theory and just gathering information in some weird sort of subconscious attempt to make that decision go away when it's not going to go away? Is it that vague sense of anxiety you feel that you can't really pin down? You want to figure out what those things are for you and view them as trigger points. Oh, I'm feeling this weird anxiety. Oh, it's because I've just spent the last hour reading about stuff when I know I should be doing this. And then once you intercept it, once you realize that, you want to externalize it. You want to get your notebook, pen and paper, or you want to get your notes app or whatever you use, and you want to write down exactly what you're thinking. You might write something like, I am past the margin right now. I should be taking action, but I'm seeking more information. I'm pretty sure I'm doing it because I'm afraid of this, or because of this. Or maybe it's, I'm uncertain about this project I'm working on. I'm trying to seek certainty by gathering more information, even though I know that it's not going to lead to more certainty. You just externalize your thoughts. And you don't need to write it down. You can speak into your voice notes app, whatever's easiest for you, but just get it out of your head where it's vague and undefined and into actual words. The reason this is useful is because it forces you to come face to face with reality. Because when you externalize something, now you're faced with it. Now you can read it and go, yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing. So what am I going to do about that? Am I just going to continue despite the knowledge that I know that what I'm doing is ineffective? Often this alone is enough to kick you out of the trap and push you into action. But it's something that needs to be done time and time again. It's like a habit. It's a skill, right? So intercept and externalize. Second, you need to understand that it is fundamentally going to feel uncomfortable. If the world of theory is the comfort zone for you, if it's the place you like to be most of the time, then moving into the world of action is going to feel difficult. It's going to feel uncomfortable, at least initially, until you start building momentum and get the rewards that come from it. And so you have to start actively building the habit of acting despite this discomfort, acting even when you're uncertain. You almost need to force yourself to take action way before you feel ready, because if you're like a chronic information gatherer, you're not really at risk of taking the wrong actions. You're always going to be somewhat strategic and be somewhat theoretical about things. And it's important to understand that if you're an information addict, then forcing yourself to act before you feel ready is likely when you're already past this margin anyway. Third, understand that often the information you seek is on the other side of action. This is a theme that's come up throughout this video, but the truth is you're never going to see the full picture before you start. You can't perfectly architect the path ahead of you, the solution. That's impossible. You just don't know. There's no way you can gather all the information you need before you take action, before you go down a path. The world of theory and the world of action are not mirror images. The world of action has all these unknowns. The world of theory is just like an opaque sort of picture of this. And so even if you did somehow manage to get all this information to a point where you felt certain about the goal or the project or the path you're taking, when it butts into reality, this model needs to change, right? There's these unknowns in here that are going to change your conception of things, and they're going to make a lot of this information that you've gathered useless. And there's a quote from Nietzsche, I can't remember the exact phrasing, where it's like, perhaps there's a realm of wisdom from which the logician is exiled. And I think that applies here. there is a wisdom in doing and tinkering that can never be gained from theory and information gathering. Fourth, you want to define the problem and the goal. If you don't have definition, it's very easy to get stuck in this trap, to constantly loop around and seek more information. You don't know exactly what you're looking for. You don't even have a rough idea. And so you just look for everything. By defining the problem or the goal, you set boundaries on the research or the information you need to gather, or at least you have an automatic filter for knowing whether something is relevant or not. For example, let's say you run an online business and you want to launch a digital product. You've never done it before. Maybe you've been a coach or something, or you've offered services and you want to launch a course. Well, what is the goal? What are you actually trying to do here? Define that. I want to launch a course on this date and I want it to make X amount of money. What are the problems? What don't you know? Oh, well, I'm not sure how to structure email campaigns for this. I'm not sure which technology stack to use. I think that's the first time I've said technology stack. I should have said tech stack. Everyone says tech stack. Why say technology stack? Anyway, what information do I need? You just define this, right? And so you set a sort of boundary or box around the information that you need to gather. A useful inversion here is to know what you need to ignore. You might not know exactly what information you need to gather, but you probably know what to ignore. And you can define the boundaries that way. For example, in launching a digital product or course, you might say, well, I can ignore anything related to the development of the course because I've done YouTube. And so I know how to film myself. I know how to record things. I don't need any extra information there. So you just define these things, you know what to ignore. Shane Parrish says, most of us don't know what to ignore. Because of that, we try to consume more information thinking it will help us. If you find yourself searching for more information and you're not quite sure what you're looking for, it's a strong indication you don't understand the problem. If you understood the problem, you'd know what information to hone in on. Next is to follow frameworks, especially if the project or goal you're working on is new to you. You do not need to reinvent the wheel, and attempting to is an exercise in unnecessary information gathering. It's very hard to gather information and theorize your way around proven concepts. It's not a wise thing to do. Let's say, for example, you want to start the freelancing business. Your real problem is getting clients, right? And there's a framework out there. In fact, there's multiple. But there's a framework out there that exists that's helped thousands of freelancers get clients. Instead of adopting it, trusting it, and taking action on it, you end up adding to it. You end up trying to outsmart it. You seek more information. You're trying to find this elusive roadmap that's uniquely yours. But step back and you can see how stupid that is, because here's a framework from someone who's actually done what you're trying to do, and they're telling you what to do, and you're just saying, nope, I'm smarter than you, and I can figure these things out by not actually getting clients, but by doing all my own research over here. That's just dumb. So follow frameworks. Use heuristics. Simple heuristics often outperform complex strategies. We've looked at why complexity and more information doesn't always lead to better results, the horse betting example. And so it's useful to have these heuristics in mind where they can just force you to take actions and make decisions. One very popular one, which is highly relevant to the topic at hand, is the 70% rule, that you should act when you think you have 70% of the information. This is hard to quantify and define, and you shouldn't really try to, but it's sort of this vague feeling of, I have enough, or this is good enough. It's not perfect. I don't feel absolute certainty. I still feel a bit scared and uncomfortable, but I kind of know that I'm at the margin. The next is the 80-20 rule, focusing on the 20% of the actions and information that will produce 80% of the results. So if we go back to the example of launching a digital product or a course, there's really 20% that's going to produce 80% of the results. Is the offer good? Is it something that people actually want? And is it messaged clearly? Like these two things and the distribution are going to produce 80% of the results. And you can almost ignore everything else, all the little tactics and fancy things, right? And then one of the most useful heuristics that I've found is that the more uncomfortable path is usually the right one. Naval Ravikant has a variation of this where he's like, if you're faced between two paths or decision, you should choose the one that's more uncomfortable in the short term because usually it's the right one. There's so many forces that are pushing you away from the hard, important good, worthwhile path. We want to be in stasis. We want to be in homeostasis. We want to be comfortable. And so we will often default to the easy path, which happens to be the path of less growth. Now, two more helpful things to get unstuck. This one's obvious. It's to set constraints and deadlines. When you are under pressure, you will escape the information trap. Simple as that. And so you must set deadlines for yourself, for your goals, for your projects. What are the outcomes and by when? Another thing you can do is time bound your research and information gathering phase and set arbitrary cutoff points for it. So perhaps you've got this month-long goal of launching a digital product or doing whatever. You say, the first 3 days, I'm just going to research and plan and think and gather information. But after those 3 days, boom, I'm done, right? Sure, maybe you have to learn a few things as you go, but that definitive research phase is cut off 3 days in. It's useful to have accountability here, someone who can call you out when you're looping around in this information trap. It can be a friend, it can be a coach, it can be a public commitment on social media, for example, but useful to add that to your arsenal. And finally, you want to adopt a testing-oriented mindset. Constantly ask yourself the question, how can I test this? How can I get real feedback instead of theorizing? If you want to build a business, but you find yourself looping around and reading books and articles, Substacks, watching YouTube videos, but you haven't done anything with your idea and you're trying to perfectly plan and architect the path ahead, then that's just not going to work. That's not a testing-oriented mindset. You want to figure out what is the fastest, most direct path to validating this, to getting real market feedback. Almost all of the time, it's talking to people, potential customers, which is far more uncomfortable than just gathering information and research and stuff. So what are the minimum viable actions to move things forward and get that data? And how do I focus on iteration over theory to gain that real world knowledge and wisdom and tacit experience that I need, that can't be found in the world of theory? So that is it for this video. I hope you found value in it. Now go take what you learned from this, escape the information trap, and push yourself into the world of action. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.